Hi, I'm here to talk about how That Game Company created the unique social dynamics in Sky Children of the Light. I'm John Hughes, a field engineer at That Game Company, and since 2015, I've been working on the social components of Sky. Most of my background is in engineering, but I do a lot of design work day to day. This includes working on our relationship and gifting systems, emote and outfit systems, and our matchmaking. I also wanted to mention a lot of what's in these slides comes from work done by over 50 people and mentoring and feedback from many people, but particularly Michael Hyland, John Edwards, Nicholas Clark, and Genova Chen. In Sky, players explore together to spread light and warmth through a desolate kingdom and return fallen stars to the sky, creating bonds with each other along the way. It takes place above the clouds, and players can explore and fly around together. Players can hug, hold hands, and chat. Sky is on iOS and Android. We soft launched December 2018 and officially launched mid-2019. When I joined TGC, we were still very much figuring out the core experience of Sky. We knew we wanted it to be social, whatever that meant. We knew we wanted a story that emotionally resonated with players. And we had a clear idea of what the setting was and had some tech to support it. We knew flying together felt really good, and our cinematic style was fairly well established. The narrative arc of Sky at the time would loosely guide players forward and provide context for their existence in the world, along with emotional highs and lows. This was super important to us. We had learned from Journey that a strong emotional narrative experience could bring people together, and we wanted to keep that in Sky. We had a problem, though. The clearer and more compelling our linear level design became, the more people ignored each other. We were bringing in playtesters who were sitting beside each other, connected to each other, and in the same game, and a good chunk of them didn't know it was multiplayer. They would see other characters in the world come and go, but they just weren't interacting. Our idea was that we should incorporate some downtime between narrative events on the main path where players had a chance to relax and spend time with each other. This leads us to our first principle. Multiplayer gameplay that inspires social play should provide a careful balance of open-ended and goal-oriented play. We switched to more of a tree structure and created alternate paths, added secrets and activities. These acted as icebreakers for deeper relationships to form. Anything in the world that slows players down can encourage the boredom necessary to inspire creative usage of the mechanics players have gained access to. Although to be clear, we saw this behavior with many types of goals, not just when players were focusing on traveling forward in the story. We had prototypes where people needed to work together to find keys to get through a door. And the more compelling the goal in front of them was, the more likely they were to ignore each other. After that, almost all of us were focused on expanding the pockets of pleasant gameplay moments like standing over a vista with another player, or wandering into a mysterious cave and finding an abandoned structure to explore together. These moments were really great, but could we encourage them to happen more frequently, and how did they fit into the larger experience? At this point in development, we knew that some of the best experiences you can have in Sky were off the main path, being guided by another player or just stumbling around together. To reinforce this, we introduced hand-holding between players, which has proven to be one of the most iconic features of Sky. One player can give control to another and then be guided around the world. A really attentive guide will create an experience for other players, trying to gauge the interest of whoever they're guiding and being careful not to move through areas too fast. A good guide will anticipate what secrets or collectibles others have left to discover and help find them. Most importantly, though, it's a nice, intimate way for players to connect. We knew it felt good to have another player offer their hand and dedicate time to showing you around or helping you find the next play area. We knew something about this felt real and emotionally resonating, and somehow, through this in-game action, you could feel a real connection to the player on the other end. After an experience like this, while playtesting ourselves, we wanted a way to be able to show each other appreciation. This leads us to our core gifting mechanic, the ability to reward another player for some value they've provided you. That value could be from holding your hand and guiding you, for helping you find a secret, entertaining you by playing an instrument, or just to show appreciation for the time you spent together. All of this felt positive and exciting, and at first, actually, we would tally gift counts for our own play sessions, and someone would come around and collect a real dollar bill for each gift. And this really magnified the feeling of getting a gift. You knew someone meant it when you got one. But we had to ask ourselves some questions. Why did we feel like this was working? And how could we build on this? More generally, how do you define social play, or what determines the success of a social gameplay mechanic? There are any number of ways to think about what makes play feel social, but we define social play as any activity performed near other players which encourages simulating the thoughts and feelings of others. The scope of what can fit under this definition is really big, and note that we're not talking about multiplayer, single player, or any social media integration or anything like that. It doesn't even say with other players, just activities near them. What we're talking about specifically is the simulation that happens in your brain of another person's brain as you interact with them. This inner simulation can be used to either anticipate the needs of others in a friendly, cooperative setting such as Sky, or maybe even to get an advantage during competitive play. But basically, we're talking about empathy. So we had interesting spaces to explore, along with a strong but subtle narrative backbone. But things still didn't fully feel right. You could acknowledge players for the experiences you shared with a gift, but the experiences were fleeting. The acknowledgements weren't tied to anything else in the world. And when you were separated from your new friend, there wasn't a clear indicator of who was who. Playing internally, we were having a hard time distinguishing players from each other, and we'd frequently have confusing playtests where one of us would just trick most of the other players into giving them gifts, and weird, erratic behavior was being rewarded. A few things came together to solve this. The first thing was expanding the outfit system and basing the available outfits on the number of gifts you had received. Through a number of iterations, we ended up with our current heart economy. Players can gift each other hearts, and in turn, players have more options to express themselves through what they wear. This was also the beginning of our social gameplay loop. The loop for a different game about building a character to fight monsters, you'd naturally allow the player to become more powerful to fight more monsters. We did roughly this in Sky, where you have outfits, social abilities like emotes and other expressive items, and as you use them with other people and they appreciate it, you get more opportunities to express yourself. The loop we created allows players to earn abilities and equipment, such as instruments, emotes, fireworks, outfits, and chat. Players can reward each other for performing these abilities in creative ways or places by giving them gifts, and these rewards grant access to additional interpersonal interactions, which in turn offer more opportunities for being acknowledged by other players. The key, I think, is always including another player in the loop somehow, either directly or peripherally, so players can get a real sense of mastery still from a social experience. They can become better at expressing themselves, more charming and entertaining, or more helpful. This brings us to our next core principle, that expression is at the core of social play. But how do we teach this unusual gifting reward expression loop? We didn't know if players would understand the system, or let alone if we could make it feel motivating. I was personally inspired by a Joseph Campbell book called Myths to Live By, and a big part of what he talks about in it is the role of rituals and rites of passage in ancient societies. He says that the role of these rituals is to teach people, especially during a transition such as approaching adulthood or elderly years, how to interact with others and function and contribute to their particular community. We embrace this idea of ritual as social learning tool directly with our reveal mechanic to reinforce a polite, calm initial meeting between players. At first, when you interact with a new player in Sky, their identity is hidden, and you can only see their silhouette. To reveal the other player, you touch your candle flames together, and once they are revealed, you can perform other interactions and see their outfit. This doubles as a nice meeting ritual and a checklist for which players in your game you've interacted with before. So this and the outfit system were deliberate steps to separate characters from each other. It doesn't matter if you can guess what someone is feeling or thinking, if you can't recognize them again to do something about it. We extended these ideas further to keep track of individual relationships. In addition to emotes and outfits you can find in the world, players have a set of abilities that they can perform with each other, which are unlocked as the relationship grows. Both players, in this case, are required to invest in the relationship to unlock more intimate interactions, such as hand-holding, hugging, and chat. Doing things this way, we mitigate a lot of the potential toxicity that can come from short, low investment interactions. We saw this toxicity in initial implementations of our chat benches, which are areas that allow instant access to chat with others. We reduce the toxic interactions by moving the benches to harder to access areas and increasing the investment required of players to engage in chat. At around this time in development, we opened early beta access. We were feeling good with internal playtests, like it really mattered spending time with someone else in Sky. But would external people get the idea of a gifting economy, or were these ideas too abstract? We found that the gifting expression loop was understandable and motivating for people, which is great. And we all had some magical moments of bumping into new players and forming a real connection. I had great experiences at the time, bumping into a random person, sticking together for a bit, and slowly investing in being able to communicate with them, and eventually unlocking chat after about an hour of play. And it turns out people are generally looking for a real connection. With these learnings at our disposal, after developing the gifting and relationship systems, we're able to apply them more generally to the rest of the game. I think it's easy to confuse something you do together with someone as being social just by virtue of you both being there. I think we can tell, though, that some activities are definitely more social than others. I think typically, if you gave someone the task, design some type of interaction for two people where in the end they're going to feel good about each other. A pretty common first thought would be to put them in a situation where they help each other accomplish something. In a video game, this task might be to kill a monster together or to use a two-person switch to open a door and progress. Where these examples don't line up with how we're thinking about social play is it takes very little thought about another person to do either of these things. In the case of a monster, even if it needs a coordinated strategy to win against, you're typically not thinking about the other player as long as they're doing their part. In the case of a door requiring two people to open, the other person has the exact same function as a simple key, which definitely doesn't encourage you to simulate their brain in any way. You just want to get to the other side. I think if you don't need to know how the other player feels to perform your task together, players often slip into a mode of treating each other as tools, just a means to an end. So in both these cases, we potentially had the opposite effect than we intended. At best, the two players might have a muted feeling of unity, or more likely, one player will mess up and somehow inconvenience the other. So actually, Sky does literally have two-person switch doors. And this almost contradicts the previous slide, but doesn't Exactly, and it just shows how context for these goals really do matter. We encourage people to think about the way that others feel with a slight tweak. We keep all of our multiplayer doors on side paths, and all main path doors all of them are single player. That way, players can always progress on their own. But if they can convince other players, often non-verbally, only through chirps and emotes, to follow them to a secret area, they'll both be rewarded. Uh, Most of the time, this means playing with the other player for a bit and building some rapport. Maybe like unlocking some friendship abilities, or really just investing in them in any way to prove to them that you won't just abandon them as soon as they change course. It's a subtle difference, but one design encourages players to consider each other and the other one doesn't. So for sure, there's a ton of opportunity for social cooperative play. It's just important to keep in mind that whatever we're encouraging players to do with each other involves thinking about others as people, and ideally also encourages them to consider the way they think and feel. So to review, a few of the key points I've discussed. Goal-oriented play is the enemy of social play. Players really need a chance to relax and get a little bored before they start focusing on each other. Play becomes social when it requires you to understand and empathize with others. And giving players the ability to express themselves in unique ways is how players form connections. A few more notes on best practices for encouraging social play. We don't force players to perform any of these interactions. Players can complete the whole story arc without the help of others. This is important because as soon as you start thinking that someone is doing something with you because the designer has forced them to, even if the designer hasn't, you lose a little bit of trust in the other player that they're being genuine. So a tutorial quest to join a guild or a daily task to send a gift can potentially do a lot more harm than good. A good example of where we've used this learning is sending gift messages to other players asynchronously. We've considered having a send all button, but instead it takes time to send a gift to each person individually. Without this, I think we would be missing out on an opportunity for players to build additional trust with each other. Also, as you play Sky, you start to develop a bit of a sense for the types of players there are. There are some who dive into relationships too quickly, and others that are measured or conservative in offering or accepting gifts. This is another place where we encourage players to think about how the other feels, to time the next step in the relationship in a comfortable way. Something that has come up continually as we've developed and maintained Sky, with all of these social tools at players' disposal, and with the rest of the experience really designed to get people interacting with each other, it's totally possible to have an awkward encounter with another player. And something we've tried really to balance really carefully is how much or how little we protect players from these interactions. Aside from a bug or like a violation of our terms of service and just pure social awkwardness I'm talking about. As a prime example, a mismatched level of investment between two players, where let's say a player chooses not to reciprocate a gift, we stay pretty hands-off. This is related to the earlier point where it's best to avoid forcing players to interact because it removes trust. I think by the same token, removing the stakes involved in investing in another player also removes the opportunity to be vulnerable. There are a lot of ways to experience drama in a game. It can come from a narrow escape in combat, great direct or environmental storytelling, or any number of places. For a big portion of Sky players, that drama comes from real interpersonal experiences, being slightly vulnerable in front of others, and eventually paying off in terms of them reciprocating and forming a deeper connection with the other person. I think you need a range of social interaction. You need the lows to really appreciate the highs. Ultimately, what I think is crucial to designing social experiences is giving players the opportunity to anticipate other people's thoughts and feelings, and act on those in some expressive, creative, caring, and tangible way. Thank you for listening.